We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
We're your hosts, Rick Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
In each episode, we bring you meaningful conversations with vegan changemakers that remind us progress is possible, even in a world full of bad news.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Vegan Compass podcast. As always, we are so excited to have you with us, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can probably see that we have a smile on our face because it always brings us so much joy to chat with amazing guests and bring this information to the vegan community. So how are you this morning, Rick?
Oh, look, I'm well, but I'm not going to complain about getting up early because our very special guest has got up much earlier than us, and because she's in Western Australia, so it's still really early for her. But we are very honoured to have Anita Marriott here today. Looking forward to this chat a lot. I've been looking through all her stuff and she's fascinating. So this could be really cool.
Very interesting journey and lots of insights that are really going to help vegans, especially with their mental health and living an optimal life. So we'll get more into that shortly. So
Anita, I'm going to start off with our normal questions. Who are you? And what do you do?
Oh, who am I and what do I do? I'm prepared to answer this. Thank you for priming me. I always love to hear this about your guests. So I'm going to give you the really zoomed in perspective first of all. So I am Anita. I am the vegan mindset coach. So I'm a life coach who works with vegans, and I help my fellow vegans to survive and thrive in a non-vegan world. So that is my little one line, little zoomed in, this is who I am as a professional and what I do. And then if I zoom all the way out to the broadest possible perspective, how I see myself is as just a sentient being who's inextricably connected to every other being on this planet. And this awareness permeates everything I do. Right? Because I know that everything I do has an impact on not only others, but also the environment that supports all of us, right? And so carrying that with me really helps me to be the person I want to be in the world. So that's a really super zoomed out context, and that might sound a little bit kind of spiritualistic or even woo-woo to some people, and I promise you it's not, because I'm very much a very science-based person, and this is physics and chemistry, right? Everything I do has an impact. It ripples out in the physical environment, and it ultimately comes back to me. So that is a very zoomed out context. And if we then kind of come back into the more human scale context, which is what most of us are interested in, is who am I? So I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in Hungary, which is Central Europe. It was behind the Iron Curtain under communism back then, which made me one of the last of the asylum seekers to leave there before the Iron Curtain fell in the early 1990s. And so the reason I mention this is because it helps to give the context of my background, which is the fact that I've come from this tradition of self-sufficiency. So in these places behind the Iron Curtain, under communism, technically the state was supposed to provide you with everything you needed if you just did your part and did your work. The reality was people were really struggling, and if you were not self-sufficient to a certain extent, you wouldn't survive. So that meant that everybody, no matter where they lived, had at least a small garden. If they were lucky, they had access to a piece of land, and they grew their own fruit, vegetables, but also animals. And being that Central and Eastern European tradition, it was very animal-centric in terms of the diet. So I started off in a place where we absolutely grew and killed and ate all our own animals, who are my friends, unfortunately. But also, as we came to Australia, my dad brought that, both the distrust of government and also that need to feel secure and self-sufficient with him, which meant that right up to the point when I left home, I was living in an environment where we were growing and killing and eating our own animals, which of course makes for a really interesting journey to becoming a vegan, right? So it was a very long journey for me getting there, but I am now 9 years vegan.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I had no idea that you're from Hungary, and it's very interesting how that has obviously shaped your life path. And I'm very interested to get more into your vegan journey as well. You also, your professional background was you studied to be a vet as well and worked as a vet for a while. And I believe it was, burnout and compassion fatigue that sort of led you to leave that industry. So I'd love to know a little bit more about this part of your journey, because compassion fatigue and burnout are so common in the veterinary profession. And looking back, what do you think were the primary factors that led to your burnout?
So compassion fatigue, absolutely. That in itself is a huge factor. Compassion fatigue itself is not burnout. Burnout is, of course, a physiological state and impacting some major regulatory systems in our body. But compassion fatigue is a big contributor to that. So definitely, in addition to that compassion fatigue, there was also just this sheer physical exhaustion for me from that unrelenting workload that vets certainly had back then. And from what I can hear, I don't know that it's improved much. And then on top of that was that sense of powerlessness that I had in the face of what to me looked like an overwhelming problem that I just couldn't seem to make a dent in. And by that, I am referring to that systemic normalization of animal exploitation. Right. So to be clear, as a vet, I actually never worked in large animal practice or even mixed animal practice. And by large and mixed, what they're referring to is that you're also working with what is commonly referred to as production animals. So the animals that we exploit and abuse for our own purposes. And the reason I didn't do that was because I'd gone into denial quite early. So through vet school, I had learned that not all animals were treated as nicely as we treated them at home, when they were our friends, until they had that one terrible day and we did some horrible things to them. But a lot of animals, in fact, most animals who are being used and exploited for human use had terrible lives. And I learned this in vet school. And I very quickly realized that I could never be a servant to those industries. So I decided early on I would only ever work with small animals. So by small animals, we're talking about animals who are companions to humans. And so I went into small animal practice thinking if I buried my head in the sand and ignored the horrible reality because I just couldn't face it at that time, I could just be happy helping pets live happy lives. Okay. And I tried to do that for 5 years. Of course, the reality that struck me very soon after entering a small animal practice was that I still couldn't escape the exploitation. I was still, one of the first things I had to do was euthanize greyhounds, right? The ones that were being dropped off because there was the agreement between the vet practice and the the racers, the greyhound people. The dogs that no longer were of use to them would just get brought to our clinic, left at the front counter, put out in the back in the cages. And then when the vets had time in between consultations and surgeries, we would go ahead and drain them of their blood because they became blood donors, and then we would put them to sleep. And that was horrific to me. That was something I discovered only once I entered vet practice. On top of that, we were doing shelter work. We were euthanizing, hundreds of dogs and cats that were surplus to requirements that could not be rehomed. And on top of that, we were serving breeders. Right, we were helping breeders to breed. They were doing the ultrasounds and the cesareans and all of the things that need to happen to these dogs. Often they can't even give birth naturally because of the defects we breed into them. And so I could not escape the animal exploitation even there. And I started to realize over the time that effectively I was being the ambulance parked at the bottom of the cliff. That's how I view it, right? There's these industries that are just shoving animals over these cliffs by the thousands all of the time. And all I could do was try and catch as many as I could, as many of the survivors as I could, and help them. And often the best I could do to help them was just to give them a good death, which is, of course, what euthanasia means. And I, after 5 years of doing that, I realized that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I wanted to be building the guardrail at the top. I wanted to be shutting down the greyhound industry. I wanted to just ban all breeding of animals when the shelters were overflowing. So I realized that if I was going to be helping to do this, and if I was going to be helping more than just the few pets that I could help in that situation, I needed to step outside of veterinary practice, and I needed to be looking at and addressing the broader systems that were enslaving and exploiting animals. And in order to try to understand how I could do that, how I could influence those systems, that led me to sustainability work, trying to understand.
Oh, look, it's sort of mind blowing. We just had Free the Hounds, Gemma from Free the Hounds on, and yeah, she was just telling us so much about the greyhound industry, and you've actually just told us even more that people don't understand. One of the things about the veterinary practices that I can never understand is why aren't they all vegan? But that's a whole other conversation we could have another day.
Maybe we can take a side tangent and you can give us some insight into that part of your journey, because I believe you weren't vegan when you were a vet.
And I couldn't be. That's the craziness. That's the irony of it. It's actually. Oh, and I was totally going to talk about this later when we talk about the transition to veganism, but we can talk about it now. It's about allowing yourself to see the world through the eyes of the animals. And when you are having to do the kind of work that I was doing, even just serving animal companions, the pet side of things, even there, when you allow yourself to see the world through the eyes of the animal, to truly step into empathy with them, you couldn't do your work. You just simply couldn't do the things that you had to do. You would break. And eventually that does get, it becomes part of the compassion fatigue and the burnout. You actually, for many of us, allowing ourselves to see the world through the eyes of the animals isn't actually possible until we stop engaging in their exploitation and their abuse. That's a key.
Wow.
I guess it's kind of a coping mechanism to shut that part of your brain off to their exploitation and the experience from their perspective in order for you to be able to keep doing your job. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's just always been something that's been on my mind. I've worked in animal rescue shelters and being the only vegan in an animal rescue shelter and going, why aren't you all vegan? So yeah, that kind of helps me understand a bit more. But once you left the veterinary profession, so you moved into sustainability. How did that help you connect the dots between people, animals, and also the environment?
Studying and then working in sustainability, I finally gained that broader understanding of our systems of production and consumption. And I was horrified to realize just how very dependent those systems are on exploitation of sentient beings. So that includes humans and non-human animals. And so it was also this work that opened my eyes to that interconnectedness of everything that I referred to before, right? It was the sustainability work that allowed me to realize that the fact that we, in fact, live in a closed system on this planet. So where every single choice, every action has a consequence for all of us, right? In a system like this, there is no such thing as a truly personal choice, or even, the common word we all use is just to throw something away, right? There is no way in a closed system. Eventually it will make that ripple, will make its way around the world and come right back to us. So realizing just how important it was to look at every single thing I do and the impact that I have, that allowed me to really connect the dots. So it wasn't just about helping animals because I thought they were my friends. It was really about also protecting the environments that support them. So it's looking beyond just beings, even the non-sentient ones like trees and plants, but also soil, water, air, all of that matters. And so being able to see things in that larger context suddenly allowed things to make sense. Right. And that's where things started to click. So that gradually walked me towards the edge of veganism.
Amazing. And what was the catalyst or like the final choice to go vegan? How did that look for you?
It's funny, decisions are always made in an instant, right? When you finally make the decision, it just happens. There's no time scale required for it. But for me and for many people, it's like this. It takes a long, long time, a long build up and a culmination. So for me, it was 20 years of unlearning carnism, basically, right? So that system of belief that we're all born and raised into, that we are superior beings and that animals are there to serve us, right? So it took me 20 years to unlearn that, and it's started when I was 16 years old. So still living at home with my dad, with all our, our chickens, our ducks, our geese, our pigs. We even had a dairy cow because in Australia we had access to enough land to do that. So living in this context, when I was 16, I was, I guess, finally old enough where my dad considered me able to both, physically participate, but also to be able to handle being part of a slaughter. And at this point, he decided he was going to kill a young pig. He was probably less than 6 months old, so still small enough for just 2 people to restrain, and he needed my help. And he asked me, well, basically directed me, because there was no such thing as saying no to Dad, that I would be holding down this pig while he cut his throat. And so I complied like the good child that I was. But in the process of doing that, as I looked into this poor animal's eyes, and I saw the light fading from them, and he was looking up at me, just like pleading. Like I saw the reflection of like betrayal. And as I saw myself reflected in those eyes, for just a briefest moment, I saw myself as the monster, right? That was my first realization that this is really wrong, right? The thing that I'd been led to believe, that it's normal and natural and necessary to eat our friends, and yes, it's a bit sad, I was confronted with the true horror of what that really meant. And so that was the very beginning of my journey. And then after that, a couple of years later, I left home, I went off to vet school, I lived on campus at college. And having decided in that moment with the pig that I would ultimately aim to work towards a life where I minimized my impact, my harm, my exploitation of animals, but not really understanding what that looked like. I didn't yet fully understand even what veganism was, or that it was possible to live without consuming animals. So off I went to vet school. I knew that vegetarianism was a thing, and they had vegetarian options at the college where I lived. It was a residential college, so all our meals were provided. And I even put myself down as vegetarian, very hopefully. That's how I started. And then this was 25, 30-ish years ago now. Gosh, it was a while ago. The food was terrible. I very quickly found that it was pretty much inedible and probably nutritionally incomplete, and I wasn't going to survive very long on it. And so I kind of relapsed back into eating animal products, but I can tell you I have not eaten pig flesh since that day when I was 16. That was the turning. So that was the turning point. It was the start of a journey. So I was still eating chickens and cows and dairy and all those other things through college. And then as soon as I graduated, and I was a young veterinarian living on my own, I very intentionally continued that journey towards vegetarianism, because I thought that was acceptable. Vegetarianism was a known thing at that time. And so I then spent several years learning how to cook and prepare vegetarian food, because having come from this sort of Eastern European background where every food I was taught to prepare had animal product in it, I basically had to start from scratch. And being a very busy working veterinarian who's working 14, 16-hour days, coming home exhausted, probably not having eaten all day, I was surviving on some very basic foods and not really having the opportunity to do much cooking experimentation. So typically I'd come home at like 10 o'clock at night. I would throw a potato on the microwave with some frozen vegetables, and when I pulled that out, I'd dollop some sour cream on there, and that would be my meal. I hadn't discovered hummus yet. If I had, I could have been vegan, right? And I was surviving on that, and probably on Milo so thick that a spoon could stand up in it. That was my nutrition. So gradually over those years of being a vet, I was getting very close to vegetarianism, and by the time I finished vetting, I was pretty much vegetarian. And then as I got more involved in the sustainability work and started realizing the environmental impacts of these systems, that pushed me further and further. So over those years of working as a sustainability professional, I wasn't just statically vegetarian in a fixed kind of way. I was gradually phasing animal products out of my life over the 10 years that I was vegetarian. I was initially, I guess I was reducitarian, then I was vegetarian before becoming vegan. And so by the time that I was actually ready to make that final decision in that one moment, I had gotten down to, I was, yes, still consuming dairy. Eggs I was only eating from my happy backyard chickens, right? I wasn't buying or eating eggs outside of the home. So there wasn't really a great deal left for me to give up. But that moment when the decision when I made that decision, it was a confronting moment for me. And the thing that finally tipped me over the edge was I was literally walking to work from the train station because I was a sustainability professional, very sustainable, catching public transport. And on my way to work, I saw this just A4 printed page, black and white copy, and had a picture of a little black and white dairy calf on it, and an explanation of what had happened to that calf. And of course, I was kind of vaguely aware of it. I had buried this in my memory from 20 odd years earlier, as you know, from my veterinary training. But in that moment, it just hit me. And I guess I was ready. I'd already given away so much of the consumption of animal products, but this was the one thing I was still clinging to. I considered myself absolutely, addicted to dairy, and I did not know that I could ever give it up. And I kind of come to this uneasy truce with myself of, oh, this is just the one thing I'm doing. It's just such a minor thing, right? And then being confronted with the reality, I thought, that's it. No. I was confronted with my own hypocrisy, and I in that moment, I made the decision, that's it, I'm done.
Well, it's interesting you say dairy because so many people, that's their tipping point. And as a lot of the scientists say, dairy has casein in it, and that's actually more addictive than heroin. And that is why people have so much trouble giving up dairy. But I was chuckling before because you said that you would sometimes at dinner just throw in a potato into the microwave and some vegetables. I still do that. It's like, that's sort of like my go-to meal if I've been working a lot and it's like, oh, I wonder if we got potatoes. Yeah, I'll just go chuck some in the microwave and that's it. So yeah.
I have literally never done that.
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. I would come home from gigs and it'd be like 3 a.m. I'd be starving. And I'd be going, oh, what's there to eat? And if I'd see the potatoes, I'd go, that's it. That's what I'm having. So still to this day.
Oh my gosh.
It's like a little vice.
I like bland food, but I don't know about just a potato in the microwave.
Well, you do potato, you do some peas, corn, then you throw in, sometimes you'll do curry powder or sometimes a little bit of oil in it.
Okay, we've got herbs and spices going.
Yeah. They sort of come in sometimes. If I'm really hungry, no, it'll just be the potatoes and the peas and corn. Did you know that most of our listeners aren't subscribed yet?
If you're enjoying the conversation and believe these stories deserve to be heard, make sure you're subscribed.
It's a free and easy way to help us grow and keep these conversations going.
Oh gosh.
But anyway, before that segue, moving on. So many vegans talk about the before and after moment in their lives. How did becoming vegan reshape the way you saw the world and how you interacted with the world?
That is such a question, isn't it? In the most fundamental way, right? After becoming vegan, and I suspect I'm not the only person who's had this experience, I started to see the world in a way that I had never seen it before. And that is through the eyes of the animals that, the exploited, the abused, and the displaced, because it's also the ones that are getting displaced by all of our systems of consumption, losing their habitats and so on. I started to just see all of this, right? Because prior to that, while I was still consuming the animal products, I couldn't allow myself, right, to do this. I had that one momentary glimpse of what it felt like to see myself as the monster, and I couldn't go near that again. I couldn't touch it. But when I became vegan, that fear of seeing myself as the monster suddenly disappeared. I'm like, oh, I'm no longer, involved in actively exploiting these animals. So maybe I can allow myself to see just, maybe cautiously what it might be like to be them. And so I, for the first time, allowed myself to put myself in the place of the animals without real reservation. And what I wasn't expecting is that I would now start seeing everyone else around me, all of the non-vegans around me, as the monster. All right. And oh God, the monster that I had feared myself to be and now no longer feared myself to be. Everybody, suddenly I was surrounded by monsters. And it's so obvious now in hindsight, of course, if I thought that I would see myself as the monster until I stopped consuming them, of course I'm going to see everyone else that way. It wasn't obvious. And I guess before being vegan, I was living in a very me-centered kind of world. It's like my focus was all outward. It was until the moment I became vegan, even though I was vegetarian, I think I was still wearing that lens of carnism, of humans are superior, animals are here for our consumption. And so even though I felt like animals were my friends, I still felt myself or saw myself as above them. And it was up to me to be kind and compassionate. So I had this very welfareist view, which a lot of people who still buy into carnism do. It's like, given that it's just just simply a fact that these animals will be used for our purposes. How can we minimize their suffering? And so that had been my very me-centered view of, that they are here to serve me, and I can be kind and benevolent and reduce their suffering. Never occurred to me that they had their own experience that was worthy of consideration, and that to them, it wasn't just me that mattered, but everyone else. For them, every other human being who was using and abusing them was the monster. And so suddenly, gosh, I've put on this new lens that I saw the world through, which was a lens that the animals were seeing the world through. And my friends, my family, my colleagues, they were suddenly all these monsters, right? They were suddenly all these flesh-eating zombies walking around me. So when we identify with the victims in such a way, when we see the world from their perspective and we see everyone as a predator, as a threat, as a perpetrator, we start feeling very unsafe in the world, very disconnected. I think Claire Mann, the vegan psychologist, the wonderful vegan psychologist, puts it as like waking up as a stranger in a strange land. Even though everything is familiar, nothing is really familiar anymore. Like, we just simply don't understand it. That is the before and after becoming vegan.
Yeah, wow, you have articulated that so well. And I've just been nodding along through everything you were saying because I really resonate with that so much. Yeah, that feeling of just, everyone around you is like, they're not a monster because they're your family, they're your friends, they're the people that you love and they love you. But there's still this fundamental thing that they don't understand to the same extent that you do, and it makes it really hard for that not to be a barrier in relationships.
I like the zombie analogy.
Yeah.
I'm sort of, you're talking about the zombie and I'm thinking, well, yeah, that actually makes sense. It's
flesh-eating zombies.
Flesh-eating zombies.
Yes. But you just mentioned Claire Mann, and obviously she has also coined this term Vystopia, and you have spoken a lot online, on social media, and in your presentations about your experience with Vystopia. So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that and what was happening for you at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking here about the first 1 to 2 years of me being vegan. And two interesting and very different things were happening at the same time. So one was that I was lucky enough upon becoming vegan to discover whole food plant-based diet. So I was very lucky to go straight into consuming a whole food plant-based diet. And interestingly, Rick, you mentioned about the addictive nature of dairy. I thought I would really struggle to give it up, but I actually didn't miss it right from day one. It was amazing. I went onto this amazing whole food plant-based diet. Thank you, Dr. Michael Greger, for your daily dozen. It's now an app, but back then I was just ticking it off on my fridge on a piece of paper every day, basically, the things I needed to consume every day to be healthy. And I never felt like I was missing out. So I felt great in terms of food straight away. What it also helped me to do was to suddenly gain energy I'd never had before, to just drop a whole bunch of weight I was carrying because of the eggs and dairy I was eating that I was not aware of. So excess weight dropped off me. I started to feel just fitter, stronger, just better in my body. After being a lifelong couch potato and hating running, I actually felt the urge and the actual true desire to start running at age 38, right, for the first time in my life. And I started running and I started training for marathons, and I was in the best shape of my life. I was feeling fit, strong, and amazing in my body. And so that part of it was great. And then in complete contrast to this, at the same time, my relationships were falling apart, right? I was starting to see people as monsters. And of course I not straight away. It's like, okay, they just don't know. They don't know what I know, which is what all vegans think, right? So I'm just going to tell them, the truth. And if they are like me, and I think they are, these are people I love, they share my values, they too will change. And of course they didn't. Nobody changed, not straight away. I realize now that I was confronting them with too much, right? And we'll talk about this a bit later. But they refused to change. And then I did start to see them as monsters. I'm like, you are doing this intentionally. And so I became disconnected. I became alienated. So from, family, friends, colleagues, I let all my friends go. I didn't want to be with these people who didn't care enough to change. And so I was extremely lonely and isolated during that time, even as I was getting like fit and strong and feeling amazing and thinking I was setting such a great example, I was miserable, right? I was miserable and I was resentful at the people around me. Now, I wasn't on social media. I didn't know any other vegans in real life. Crazily enough, there was another vegan living literally around the corner from me. I did not find this out for years, right? I only actually ended up finding her through social media. So I genuinely thought I was utterly alone, like that stranger in a strange land. And it was really hard. It was a really difficult time. And so as I was getting increasingly despondent about the lack of response from everyone around me, I started to become quite misanthropic. So for people who haven't heard that term, it just means, really hating humanity. Like, just, yeah. So for a while there, I was genuinely hoping that humankind would just be wiped out, by some kind of disaster or virus. It nearly got my wish fulfilled under COVID, right? But I was hoping that humankind would just be wiped out so that the planet and all the animals could just recover without us, because I saw us like we were the virus. Right, we needed to leave this planet. We didn't deserve to live. So that was probably at the deepest depths of my Vystopia. That's where I got to.
Oh, look, I can so relate to that. I remember I was living on the Gold Coast for 25 years and I had become vegan up there. And again, on the Gold Coast, like you, I thought I was the only vegan. I didn't know any other vegans up there. And I was kind of, wading my way through this carnist lifestyle. And suddenly a friend of mine from one of the animal shelters said, oh, there's this big event happening. You should go along and I'll come with you. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll go along together. And I walked through the door and it was being run by Coast to Coast Animal Friends. But I also walked through the door further and there was Philip Wallen. And Philip came up to me and he said, oh, I saw you at the exhibition last night. There was an exhibition the night before. And he said, who are you here with? And I said, I don't know anyone. He said, come and sit with me and my wife Trix. And I'm like, wow, Philip was a hero of mine. And I'm sitting there with Philip and he goes, oh, yeah, I'm the keynote speaker as well. It's like, oh, really? Okay. So I met all these wonderful people. But yeah, it was quite a journey. So interesting to say that, when you said that there was a vegan living around the corner from you, like all these people were just so close and I never actually even knew. So interesting. But so, you're going through all this issue with friends, family who weren't going vegan, and you're getting miserable about it, which I can relate to fully. When you reached out for support, you actually realized that there was actually a massive gap in the whole mental health resources tailored specifically for vegans. What is the danger when a struggling vegan goes to a non-vegan therapist or coach? And are there many vegan therapists and coaches apart from yourself and Ianthe, who we know well?
Yeah, good question. So, well, the danger is that when a vegan goes to a non-vegan therapist or coach is because that non-vegan doesn't tend to understand. They haven't put on that same lens that we see the world through. They're viewing it through their diagnostic lens, and the vegan ends up being pathologized, right? The thing that is actually a very normal response for anyone who sees the world the way that we do. It's a normal and healthy response that makes perfect sense from a very neurological perspective. They don't get it. And so they will give us diagnoses like eating disorders or self-harm or some kind of social maladjustment problem because we refuse to eat with, people eating non-vegan food and those kinds of things. And often the non-vegan therapist will tell the vegan that the solution is just to start seeing the world the way that normal people do, right? The way that non-vegans, normal people see the world, which means the therapy would involve trying to put their blinkers back on, essentially, right? The ones that veganism has removed, and to put that lens of carnism back over their eyes to make it acceptable again for people to be exploiting and abusing animals, even if we ourselves don't choose to participate in that. And to me, it's like being told that the only solution is to get plugged back into the matrix that we fought so hard to escape from, right? That is a danger. Now, I've heard a few instances, which is really worrying, where therapists have actually lost their professionalism and taken it personally. Like they themselves were triggered by the things that vegans said. So we're used to our friends and family and other non-vegans getting triggered when we share information with them and becoming defensive and pushing back on us in anger. Unfortunately, sometimes this will even happen with the professionals who are supposed to, keep things not personal. And so that is all the danger. So being pathologized, being told that you need to return to normal, and then sometimes also copying abuse and judgment in return from these folks who should be really helping us with our mental health.
Yeah, it's interesting that you shared your experience, Rick, because I had a similar experience. I went to a psychologist because I was experiencing burnout, and she just said, oh, well, you just need to stop doing all of your activism. You just need to stop everything, take a few months off. And I was like, I can't stop. If I don't do it, who else is going to do it? All these animals are suffering, da, 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 da. Like, it was just so black and white. And I was like, you fundamentally don't understand why I feel the sole responsibility to liberate all of these animals. Yeah, it's tough. So since the help you needed didn't exist at that time, you chose to become that resource for yourself and for others. So what were the tools or the realizations that helped you break free from Vystopia?
Good question. And you know what? You've just prompted me to remember that I didn't answer Rick's second question from earlier on.
No worries.
Has that changed? Has the availability of vegan coaches and therapists changed? And yes, I'm now it's 9 coming on to 10 years later, things are changing. I'm definitely seeing more both therapists and coaches popping up who are vegan and are capable of helping vegans get through this. So that is definitely heartening. So there's still nowhere near enough of us, but it's growing. It is growing. And same with GPs. Like there's one vegan GP here in Perth where I live that everybody knows about and everybody wants to go to her. Of course, no hope for most of us of ever seeing her. So I think it's kind of similar in the mental health field. But you did ask about just now about what was kind of like the realization that helped me to move out of Vystopia, and that changed everything. And that was one massive realization, which I discovered through finding coaching. And no, I did not find a vegan coach, unfortunately. So I had to piece this together for myself from listening to lots of coaching podcasts where I just had to handle some of the very non-vegan and triggering things that the coaches were saying, but also lots of vegan podcasts to balance that out. And then ultimately biting the bullet, so to speak, and doing coach training myself so that I could gain the skills I needed to help myself out of Vystopia without having to go to a non-vegan professional to help me. So that massive realization that changed everything for me was that my mind is powerful beyond anything I could possibly have imagined. And the fact that my mind creates what I experience as reality, that is the single most important and mind-blowing thing. And that unlocked everything. Okay. So because this realization allowed me to then see that instead of just having removed my lens of carnism and now seeing the world clearly, what I had in fact done was adopted this new lens of Vystopia.
It's amazing how you've managed to take yourself through and come from such a background to then now do like a complete 180, and you're now vegan, you're now a mindset coach, and you're helping people, look after their soul. And I remember at the Animal Rights Forum, Ianthe and I did a presentation on guarding the flame. I was the before case. So I was all doing, I was the thing that did all the things wrong. And then Ianthe got up and she did the most amazing session with everybody in the room. And I think everybody felt like they'd just been with a vegan psychologist for years. Once she finished, she was amazing. So it's great to hear that we're getting more of these people coming through the ranks. So we can't thank you enough for that. But now you're a qualified life and mindset coach, which I was going to ask you how you became one, but you've already answered that. And you're helping vegans. What sorts of problems are you finding that vegans are facing when they come to you?
So a really big one that happens right at the start of becoming vegan is a loss of identity, right? A lot of people know who they were before they were vegan, but now that identity no longer seems to fit in a lot of ways. And the things that they used to enjoy now either seem pointless or superficial or even repulsive if they involved, the use of animals. And so they know who they were, but they don't know who they are or who they can be as vegans. So feeling really lost in that, and just being kind of adrift to a certain extent. That's one thing. Then on top of that is that hopelessness and helplessness of having tried to make a difference, having shared what they know with the people they love, and getting no positive response. And now having adopted this new lens of Vystopia, where they're seeing the world through this this way of identifying with the victims and starting to see other people as the monsters and the zombies, they start to feel victimized and at the mercy of the non-vegan world, just like the animals whose eyes they're seeing the world through. So hopelessness, helplessness, misanthropy, obviously hating humans and humankind is a big one. And it's so unfortunate because I think it's in such conflict with our core vegan values, which is all about avoiding harm and mistreatment of others. And when we become misanthropic, we forget that humans are also animals. They also deserve our empathy and our compassion. They're also just doing the best they can to survive in the world, just like all the animals. The things that we would never consider holding against animals or being angry or hating them for, we absolutely readily and willingly hate other, fellow humans for. So misanthropy is a big one. Now, the other one is thinking that they have finally taken off all of their lenses, like I mentioned before, and believing that the world is actually as they're now seeing it, without realizing it, that what they've done is actually put on this new lens of Vystopia, which is distorting the world in a whole different way for them. So that's a big one. And then of course the big thing that most of the people who come to me struggle with is that inability to relate to or convince non-vegans to change, right? So they can no longer relate, they can no longer understand, like you said, Rick, working in that animal shelter, how are all these people not vegan? I can't relate to that. And so when this is how we're seeing our fellow humans who are not vegan, we often end up actually eliciting the opposite response from them to what we want, right? So we're trying to convince them to change. We're trying to get them to open their eyes, to put on, or take off all the lenses that they're wearing. But in fact, the way that we do that often creates a very opposite response. It creates pushback and anger and judgment in return, and that distancing and disconnection. So a lot of people are dealing with that, having lost the connections in their lives. And of course, burnout, which both of you have dealt with, and I obviously dealt with in that veterinary context. I know now not to let myself get there in the activism context. But a lot of people are driving themselves to burnout in various ways, whether it's, street activism or something else, or even just their online activity, because of that insurmountable enemy that they're fighting, and without having the hope or even a vision of a vegan world. So many of us are buying into this belief that because the people around us aren't changing and we're not really seeing the impacts of our activism, our advocacy on a day-to-day basis, it is actually hopeless, and we start to give up. And I'm always amazed by how many vegans come to me. In fact, most of my clients have come to me and I've asked them to give me their vision for a vegan world. Most of them haven't even dared to hope to believe that a vegan world is possible. And so that is a thing that we definitely work on. And another couple of things, trauma, right? We're already getting traumatized by our interactions with our non-vegan friends, family, and loved ones. The fact that we are now seeing them as this sort of unsafe creature, right? This monster, this threat to this perpetrator, and we're being traumatized by our interactions with them, particularly when they don't go well. But on top of that, we're actively traumatizing ourselves. So whether that is by actually witnessing, the cruelty and abuse firsthand, or whether we're exposing ourselves to footage, to images, to documentaries, and thinking that we need to keep doing this even after we've gone vegan in order to bear witness, right? In order to keep that fuel, that fire burning, so that we keep taking action. And unfortunately, often what ends up happening instead is that exposing ourselves to this stuff and not knowing how to process it in a healthy way ends up paralyzing us with despair. And helplessness, and then sinking ever deeper into that misanthropy. So this is something that a lot of my clients who come to me are also dealing with. So not knowing how to deal with and process not only that material, but also all the other emotions we experience around our interaction with the non-vegan world. If we don't know how to do that, we end up acting it out or numbing ourselves in self-destructive ways that, of course, don't lead us to being the example and the invitation that we want to be for non-vegans, right? So we end up struggling with both our physical and our mental health. So yeah, that's just a little list of things that I'm seeing. A lot of these things I experienced myself. A lot of things I'm seeing with my clients. So yeah, curious how many of those you identified with.
Oh, so many. But I was just going to say, to be honest, before chatting with you, I didn't have a very clear understanding of what a life or mindset coach was. And now, after you've just explained all of those things that you can help vegans with, I can see so clearly the role that your work has and just the opportunity for vegans to really be transformed in how they can show up more comfortable in themselves as well, but then not be carrying around all of that trauma and misanthropy, as you said.
I think it's really important because deep down in our soul, in our heart, in our brain, we know it's right. But every time we walk out the door, we're confronted with what's wrong. And, you see it on billboards, you see it on sides of buses, and they say that vegans force our message onto them, whereas, everywhere there's advertising. You go in the grocery store, you walk straight into the meat section, and it's huge. It's like, yeah, sorry, guys, no, it seems to be the other way around. So trying to help people get through this whole non-vegan, how to live in a non-vegan world until we get to the vegan world, which, I really do hope it happens in my lifetime, but I'm a lot older than you two, so maybe not.
Hold out hope.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to get a little bit deeper into the misanthropy for a second. That's definitely something personally that I identify with a lot. I work in the social media space, so I'm constantly seeing that animal abuse content. But I think many vegans are carrying around this anger and grief daily. So how do we allow ourselves to honor that, because it is, the reality for animals, but not let it manifest into bitterness towards people, to the point where it's going to reflect? What's the word? To the point where it's going to affect all of our relationships.
Okay, so you asked about anger and grief. And so the context I want to set is that anger and grief are feelings or emotions. And I know that there's a slight differentiation between feelings and emotions. I'm just going to treat them as a whole here. The big secret is that most of us don't know how to deal with and process our emotions in a healthy way so that it doesn't manifest as that bitterness towards non-vegans that is detrimental to our relationships. So here's that secret, and that is that all of us are capable of feeling and processing any emotion in a healthy way and in just a matter of minutes. Okay, and this is a role of people like myself, coaches and psychologists, to teach us this. We should really be getting taught this in school. Like, our parents should be teaching this to us, but of course nobody knows. Not the adults in our lives, not our parents, not our teachers. We're all just going around not processing or dealing with our emotions properly. So what that looks like, what not dealing with them properly looks like, is expelling them at the world, right? So being angry, being bitter, being the, that vegan, that angry vegan, right? So expelling them. But also for some of us, it's bottling them up or suppressing them, pretending that they don't exist, trying to sweep them under the carpet, scrolling onto the next thing on our screen, trying to distract ourselves, which is also numbing ourselves. It's looking for dopamine hits to try to numb the pain that we're feeling internally, right? So being able to not do these things and instead to process our emotions in a healthy way is a really essential skill that really, really serves us. And of course, I teach that to my clients and to my community, which we can talk about later. So let's look specifically at those two feelings that you're talking about, which is anger and grief. So anger is a really simple and a clean emotion, and it is simply a sign that we are perceiving an injustice. right? So it's a fantastically helpful emotion for those of us who want to create change in the world. If we're able to acknowledge and process it in a healthy way, we can actually harness the energy of that anger to drive positive, powerful, and strategic action in service of our goals and in service of the animals. If we don't know how to process this, chances are we're just going to spew it at the next, unwitting non-vegan passing, or we'll bottle it up and end up hurting ourselves by trying to kind of like dull the pain of it. So if we know how to process it, if we know how to use it and channel that energy of the anger, we can actually use that to not only help the animals, but ultimately help us feel better as well. And then there's grief, and grief is a far more complex thing, right? It's made up of other emotions like yearning and sadness and guilt and regret. And if we don't know how to process all of those, these are very draining kind of emotions. So it will leave us depleted of our energy. It'll leave us less motivated to get out and make positive change. So again, appropriately processing these feelings is a really important part of honoring our grief so that we can then use them again to fuel that positive action.
Wow. Oh, yeah. It's like I'm sitting here and I'm feeling like, should we send her money because this is like a therapy session?
What's your hourly rate?
Yeah. But you also, like, apart from doing all this, which is amazing work, you also focus, quite heavily on helping vegans to communicate with non-vegans. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that we make when we're trying to advocate for animals?
Okay. So there's sort of 4 key things that I've identified, and I'm willing to bet we have all done them. Pretty much every person I've ever met who's vegan has done these things. So one is that we lead with information, right? We all think if they only knew all the things that we knew, they would change, right? So we come at them with info, and we often walk into the trap of doing it because we're answering a question, because they'll say to us, so I understand why you don't eat like meat, but what's wrong with dairy? And then we do the information dump. Well, what's wrong with dairy? Let me tell you what's wrong with dairy. And about 30 seconds into that conversation, the non-vegan is triggered, they're defensive, they're getting angry with us, they're shooting the messenger. So leading with information, it doesn't work. And it's because we don't know what that person actually needs to be hearing at that particular point. So leading with information is a big one. Then the next one is when they don't simply accept the information and go, oh my goodness, I didn't know that, and change. What we do is we go into convincing mode, into like debating and arguing mode. So now it's on. Now it's like, it's a face-off, because now they're already defensive, they're pushing back, or they don't want to hear it because it's too much. And so what ends up happening inevitably is they'll come back with the what about ifs. The what ifs, what abouts. So what about the desert island with the pig? what about iron? What about protein? Like all of those things. And then if we're very persistent, they actually start, coming back with alternative facts that they've discovered from, some influencer on the internet about all of these things, about how vegans are unhealthy and all of that kind of stuff. And now it's just an exchange of alternative facts and arguments. And the reality is that nobody ever wins. Even if we feel like we've won the argument, we've lost the war. We've probably lost them because nobody wants to be the loser of an argument. So trying to convince is another thing that we do wrong. And then we judge. Right, we think we're good people, and we're not. At least we're not overtly judging them, as in we're not saying judgmental things. Maybe sometimes we do, though, because by the time we've shared information, tried to convince, got nowhere with the arguments, we start to lose our patience and we start saying judgmental things. But even if we're very good, even if we're a people pleaser and we don't overtly judge, even if we're saying things with a smile on our face, the reality is that we are going to be judging people as either cowards for not being willing to hear the truth, or as selfish for knowing the truth and choosing their pleasure over the suffering of others. And that judgment is seeping out of our pores, right? As hard as we might try to hide that, they are picking up on our judgment, and that is leading to a lot of the defensiveness that's coming back at us. And a big thing that we do that we don't even realize, but it just makes perfect sense, is we start using language in terms of saying me and you rather than we. And when we start separating ourselves from them in terms of, well, I don't eat animals for this reason, or I don't consume, I don't abuse animals, whereas you're buying and eating and consuming those things, we're putting up a wall of separation between us. And so I think I actually got this from Claire Mann. Again, she's so amazing. She taught me that it's really important to use the collective we. So even though we might not have used or eaten animals in decades, it's really important when we're talking to people to actually be saying we. When we eat animals, when we breed them, when we, do all of these things, we're putting ourselves on the same side of that wall. And suddenly we are the ones that are being, misled, lied to by all of that advertising you're referring to earlier, Rick, right? We are actually just as much a victim of this system of carnism as the animals. So judgment is another big thing that comes between us. And then the fourth thing is the shock factor or the force. So when we've tried the information, the convincing, the arguments, and they're still refusing to listen, and now they're coming back with us at us with things like, oh, you since you've gone vegan, you're so superior, you think you're better than everyone else, and it's sounding to us like they're making it about us, like they really are shooting us, the messenger. Then we're like, okay, you know what? It's never been about me. It's always been about the animals. If you won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to the animals. And this is where we start sending them the footage or insisting that they watch Dominion or something else. Like we start forcing and pushing the stuff on them. Okay, don't believe me. You'll believe the facts with your own eyes, right? And then once we do that, that really breaks the trust, especially once they have been exposed to something that they find shocking or distressing. Now we have actually committed an act of violence towards them. That is how they perceive it. We've crossed a barrier, we've broken the trust, and we've alienated people. And this is how a lot of these relationships disintegrate and become alienated. Those are the things that we tend to do, unfortunately. And so I very much have adopted a different way that I teach certainly my community and my clients, which is flipping that whole structure of leading with information and trying to convince and then forcing stuff on people, flipping that on its head, and instead starting with questions, leading with curiosity, discovering where people are in those the stages of change that Ayanthi was talking about way back in I think in the 4th episode you guys did, like recognizing where are they in the stages of change. Are they pre-contemplation, contemplation? Are they preparing for change? So by asking them questions and understanding who they are, what's important to them, where are they on their journey towards veganism, then we can learn what information they actually need, which we get to offer. But in between, we actually just have to show them some compassion and understanding for where they are right now and the pain that they are experiencing as a result of being in conflict with their very much innate human values, which is that the 99% of people are good people who would never intentionally hurt an animal, but they are doing it just because they've been born into the system of carnism. So as we ask them these questions to uncover who they are, what's important to them, we learn about where their cognitive dissonance is. We get to express some compassion for that, and to also just, again, put ourselves on the same side as them by saying, hey, I was where you are. I was there once. I felt just like you do now. And then this is what changed for me. And we give them that glimpse of a possibility of change, okay? And then we ask them for permission to share with them what we now know will help them to move to that next stage of change. That's really the approach that I take now.
Yeah.
It's sort of interesting what you're saying in all the different stages, but there's always going to be that one person who will never let up, no matter what you talk to them about. And you use the we things, because I heard about the we things through Menke when I did a course by Menke, and I thought, yeah, this is really cool. And I was doing all that stuff and going through all the things, and he'd be throwing up every single argument. We got down to, oh, but what about plants? What about, that they're sentient? And I'm sort of seeing that going, oh, you're breaking my head. Like, seriously, you're breaking head. And I went through all the discussions, and I was being really nice and calm. He was getting aggressive, and then finally he said, well, you think you're so much better than me? And I just went, yeah, I do. And it just shut the conversation right down. He was in shock that I would actually say that. And then I went back and finally said, no, I don't think I am. I just think I'm on a different place where you are. We have to end this conversation. And sometimes you have to do that. You have to walk away.
And that's the thing, Rick. We often, especially when we're out there doing street activism, we set ourselves this very, very high standard of nothing short of them walking away as vegan is good enough. And unfortunately, sometimes, people are coming to us from a very different place. They're pre-contemplation. The very first time they're seeing the thing that we're sharing is that day. And so it's a massive ask to get them to agree with us and to agree to change all in that one conversation. So often what we need to do is just accept that we have had a conversation, they've considered the things, we've asked them some questions that have made them think, even if they haven't fully answered them, they're going to be walking away and their mind will not be able to help but to continue to try to answer those questions. So we have started a conversation that's going to continue in their head. It's not our task to get them all the way from 0 to 100 in a single conversation. It's just our job to identify where they are now and just shift them that tiny little bit. The next person will come into their life at the appropriate moment and help shift them that next little bit. And so just trusting and believing in that, we can feel good walking away from that conversation, having got them to wherever they're prepared to go that day. But the thing that he was doing, which of course is giving the endless whatabouts and arguments, what that really signifies is that it is the thought of changing is so overwhelming and so scary and potentially painful. Like people are seeing a lot of pain in their future from committing to going vegan, and so it's a lot easier and a lot less painful to stand there and argue with you, to try and make you wrong so that they don't have to change. So it's all about pain, and ultimately the point at which people finally do decide to make that change, as I did, is when the pain of what is happening now overcomes the pain of what we think we're going to experience when we change. That is our tipping point. And that's the spot for every person. For some people, it does happen really quickly. For some people, yes, they see dominion and they've never known anything previously. They see it, and that pain in the moment is enough to tip them over and never go back. For many other people, they're looking at everything that's going to change in their life, and rightfully so, and go, no, that's more painful than having seen dominion and living with that and still consuming animals.
Yeah, wow, you just have so many amazing insights, and I've just learned so much from this conversation. But I wanted to move into now, I guess, the transformation that vegans can experience in their mindset and how they approach these conversations. Something that you teach vegans is how to become an irresistible invitation for others to follow. So what does that look like? Can you tell us more?
Oh, okay. So yeah. So how do I teach them to do this? Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of stages to it. And after having worked with vegans for 3 years, helping them with all the things that they were bringing to me as problems and issues and challenges, I've learned that there are like 4 key things that we all need. And so now I deliver them in my coaching program. I also do this for free within my online community, which we can talk about later. But here are the key things. First of all is getting really, really, really clear about who they are and who they want to be, right? I mentioned earlier that we tend to lose ourselves a little bit when we become vegan. We lose our identity. So I spend the first part of my time with my clients on getting really clear on their values, creating a very compelling and positive vision for their life and the world that they want to create. So they've got something positive to live into, and also they've got a positive vision of a vegan world to sell to the non-vegans who are just seeing pain ahead and if they become vegan, right? So creating that really clear and compelling vision, and then defining and then capturing what their purpose is in achieving that world, and what is the role they're going to serve in creating that vision of the world, and very specifically, what is their mission? How are they going to apply their very unique set of skills and experiences and knowledge in service of that purpose? So I call this process, this first sort of 4 weeks that I spend with my clients in my coaching program, I call it setting their compass. Right. So that is their vegan compass, I guess. From there, they get to create, and I help them to create a strategy for a path forward, how they're going to live into that vision that they've created for themselves. And very importantly, what it is to align everything that they do in their life with their values, with their vision, with their purpose, so that they really, truly get to be in integrity. And when we feel in integrity, we feel amazing. Because the flip side is that it's amazing how often people, if they haven't gone through this setting the compass process, they think they kind of know their values. There's this vague set of things like compassion, kindness, whatever. But without being really clear about that, and without having that clear and compelling vision, we tend to get stuck, right? When decisions come up, we don't know, oh, do I do this? Do I do that? What's going to be the best choice for me? Because we don't have the clarity of that compass to point us in the right direction. So when we then make random decisions, to the best of our abilities without that guidance, we sometimes end up feeling conflicted or compromising on those decisions, or even self-sabotaging, not realizing that it's really our subconscious mind trying to stop us from doing things that are not in alignment with our internal compass that we just haven't unearthed. So having that really clearly set compass makes decision-making super simple. So that's one thing I help my clients to do, set that internal compass. And then from there, they get to make progress, and they get to start feeling good. Because now that they're in integrity, they're in alignment, they're not self-sabotaging, they're just making consistent progress towards their vision of their life and the world that they want to create. And so now their health starts to improve, and all the other things. Their activism becomes more effective. And now they get to start showing up as that example. So people will start noticing. And so something I noticed, or something that people started noticing about me, was that I was looking better and healthier. And some people who hadn't seen me in a number of years would actually say, wow, how is it that you look younger now than you did 5 years ago? And I get these kinds of compliments about my fitness, my health, that kind of thing. And I always say, thanks, it's my healthy vegan lifestyle. I'm always out there promoting and advertising it, and other people get to do that too, right? Living in full alignment with our values allows us to feel great, to be that positive example invitation. Now, it takes more than just having a clear compass. It also takes really understanding our mind. So all the stuff I was talking to you guys about today, about those lenses, the way that we see the world and how our mind creates our reality, that takes a bit of work to really understand and implement every single day. So that's a big part of the work that I do with my clients and with my community. And then, of course, processing emotions. We already talked about that before. It's a process. But once we've got it, it only takes a couple of minutes to deal with any negative emotion that we're feeling, and to be able to use that energy in a strategic and positive and proactive kind of way. And then finally, of course, the big piece is communication, which we spoke about briefly as well. So I teach them structures and frameworks for having these kinds of connecting conversations that I talked about before, the curiosity, compassion, and permission, when we were trying to help others to change, but also how to advocate for ourselves, which we often forget as vegans. We're so busy advocating for the animals, we forget to advocate for what we need and want in relationship, particularly with non-vegans. And so I teach people how to have vulnerable conversations, how we share our internal experience about how we see the world and how things impact us, and then asking for change, asking for different behaviors, making requests, and very importantly, setting and upholding boundaries. So that's the 4 key things that I have learned that all of us vegans need to get to that point of creating a life that we love and being the example. So we need to set our compass, we need to understand our mind and work with it rather than against it. We need to understand and process our emotions in healthy ways. And we need to learn how to communicate effectively, which none of us were taught, right? None of us were taught from the beginning. And once we can put those things together, life really starts to come together.
Well, we're now starting to wind down a little bit because time is running out. What I love that, there's so much information that was packed into just that last answer.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here going, wow, okay, I'm taking that in. But I do love the fact that you slipped in the vegan compass in there. It's like, oh,
very
little
aligned.
Bit brand recognition there. Yay. But can you now, because we are running out of time, but can you now tell us more about your coaching services and how people can connect to your community?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So, you'll find me on the internet. If you Google the Vegan Mindset Coach, I will come up. It will take you to my website. It'll take you to my Facebook page. Now, in terms of community, that exists on Facebook. Facebook seems to me, currently be the only platform that I'm aware of where communities really possible, as much as we might dislike Meta as a company. So I have got I've got a private Facebook group. So it's a completely safe space. I vet every person coming into that group to make sure they are in fact vegan, so that we are not being trolled in that group. It is a community of support. And what I do in there is I do just a free live training, short training, 20, 30 minutes every single week on the topics that we've been talking about today, all the mindset, the emotions, the communication, all of those very important things to help us all to survive and thrive. And of course, people in that community get to bring their problems, their challenges. We get to support them and discuss them and, identify the best solutions and the best way forward. And of course, in there, we also get to celebrate wins. So, that Facebook group is called Unstoppable Vegans. So I invite everyone to please come and check it out, ask to join. There are some questions. Basically, I ask you to confirm that you are definitely vegan. Come and join us. So Unstoppable Vegans on Facebook. And you can totally be in contact with me through that group. If you're interested in coaching one-on-one, you can message me directly through, Messenger on Facebook, or you can also message me through my website, which is the Vegan Mindset Coach.
Great. We'll put all of those links in the show notes.
I think I'm going to be joining another Facebook group.
Yeah. I think there's so much value in that. The fact that you do free coaching sessions every week in that group is so valuable. And one thing that's been really clear to me throughout this whole conversation is how this really is your passion, and it just radiates out of you that this is what you are in service to for vegans. And
And I think one of the main things that vegans do miss is that sense of community, is actually having people that you can reach out to at any given point in time and just interact with, because, we're all spread out across cities. And I mean, Mackenzie and her husband Brody are here in Lidcombe, and there's probably no other vegan in Lidcombe.
Don't think so.
No, and I live in Hornsby, and I think there's probably me, my wife, and maybe one other person in Hornsby who I know that are vegan. So yeah, a sense of community, and that's what I think is missing.
So could you give us a final takeaway, I guess, something that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah, definitely. Look, if you're feeling like stuck, helpless, hopeless, isolated, burnt out, any of those things, no matter where you are, just start wherever you are. Meet yourself where you are and just take a step. Just take one step towards something different. So if you are feeling, isolated and you don't know any other vegans, just reach out and try to find one other person. And that might mean going on social media and, finding, local vegan groups or vegan meetups. There's so many of them out there. I didn't know about this before when I was a lonely, isolated vegan. Gosh, even your local community groups, even your local physical notice boards at the library, you can reach out and do a little post saying, hey, I'm a vegan. Are there any other vegans, vegetarians even around who'd be, happy to make friends, that kind of thing. One thing I did, and this is how I actually made my very first vegan friend, was I advertised literally with my shirts. I bought a bunch of shirts with just positive vegan messages on them, and I wore them wherever I went. And one day this lady came up to me and she was all excited. She said, are you vegan? I'm like, yes, I am. She said, me too. And she lived not very far away from me. And she then introduced me to the broader vegan community. And that's where my community started. So there's always some way. So if you're feeling burnt out or helpless or hopeless or any of those, please reach out. There are communities like mine now. Come and join Unstoppable Vegans. From there, we can help to direct you to other resources. If find me, come talk to me. I'm really happy to have a chat with you. I will do a free consultation with you. But also, find those other, vegan psychologists and coaches who are now starting to appear out there. Get some help. Get yourself the help you need to just start moving out of that.
Wow. Well, yeah, I think I've said wow 100 times in this episode, but it's been so insightful. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise. It's really something that is going to help vegans so much. So thank you.
Anita, we just can't thank you enough for being here. This has been an incredible episode. There's probably so much more we could even delve into. Maybe we will revisit you again further down the line. But this brings us to the end of, we always walk away from these episodes and go, wow, it's just mind blowing what we uncover on the Vegan Compass podcast. So, folks, thank you for being here, for either listening or watching. We will see you all again in our next episode. See you later.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let us know by leaving a comment and share this episode with a friend.